They're supporting gay conversion therapy, state-sanctioned gay conversion therapy, which is what they do in Iran. In Iran, the government will murder gay people because they consider it abomination, or they will pay for you to have a sex change operation to heterosexualize, to fix you, right? That's what the NHS were doing. That's what various American pediatric clinics are doing.
Hello and welcome to the Anne and Phelim Scoop. My name is Anne McElhenney.
And I'm Phelim McAleer. Welcome. What's on the show
and
today?
We are not.
Yes. What?
Yes, we're not in the same spot, right?
No.
So what is on the show today?
Well, I'm in New York, but you're in LA. I just left LA actually, and you're in LA. So you have can you smell the smoke? Can you whiff the cordite down?
It's very funny because everyone, people just think because you're in Los Angeles that it's like, some small town. But actually all of the action is happening downtown, which is miles and miles away from here. Thank God. Mostly peaceful protesters, Phelim.
Apart from the burning cars, looting buildings, attacking police officers, attacking police horses, attacking Waymos. But we'll talk about that on the show. Anyway, the death of woke. Our guest this week announces the death of wokeism, Andrew Doyle. In a new book, he says woke activists went too far and what to expect from the brave new world of post-woke. So we have a really great interview with Andrew. He's an old friend of ours from the UK, now living in Arizona. So stick close to that. It's a great interview.
And it's the holy month of Pride, Phelim, isn't that correct? the holy month of Pride is upon us again.
Yes. What do you do? Do a rainbow sign or something like that? I don't know. Yes. And we look at how Target have adjusted their Holy Month of Pride coverage to suit the new post-Trump era or post-Trump election era. And let's just say they're not proud about being part of Pride.
And the military is celebrating also by removing the names of a gay icon from a ship. We out some of his beliefs that supporters would much prefer to keep in the closet.
Yes. And a British comedian, Dawn French. You won't. I mean, this is an amazing story, and it's a joke.
A lot of Americans mightn't know who Dawn French is, but yeah, she's a huge comedian in the UK. We'll bring you her latest effort to discredit October 7th, etc.
And the comment section, we will be telling you. We all read all your comments, and we love them. So LA riots, Anne. How is it?
Oh yeah. How is it being here?
Yes,
are we am I smelling cordite up here? No, we're now down by the beach. We're not smelling anything. But it's almost farcical. It's a rehearsal of what we've seen before, with journalists standing in front of crowds basically saying, mostly peaceful, like literally the same thing is happening all over again. And you can see the images we're showing here. This doesn't look like anything peaceful at all that's going on here. And by the way, I'm very offended, Phelim, because a Waymo was destroyed. More than one Waymo was destroyed. And I had my very, very first Waymo journey last week. And I love Waymos.
We need to tell people what Waymos are, because most people do not have the pleasure of a Waymo. So what is a Waymo?
That's true. They're not everywhere.
What is
a Waymo? Is a driverless taxi. And you can get the app on your phone if they are operating in your area, and you can get and there's a video of me in my first time being in a Waymo, and I loved it. The advantages are you don't have to have, which sounds terrible for me to say this, but you don't have to have a conversation with the driver, and you also don't have to tip the driver, by the way. And all the cars are Jaguars, very, very nice. So I quite like them. But here's what's happened during the mostly peaceful protests downtown. I think 2 or 3 of them have been destroyed and burned. You can see photographs of them. They're absolute monsters. But what I don't, there's a number of things, Phelim, here. One of the things I don't understand is the only flags that you can see at these protests are flags from Mexico. So is it an invasion from Mexico? Or if they love Mexico so much, why don't they go back to Mexico? I'm trying to work that out. But the only flags you're seeing are Mexicans.
Mostly peaceful Mexican flag waving. I saw the riots before I left. They're bad and they're getting worse. But I think we remember the George Floyd riots. That went on for weeks. That was widespread destruction. That was people getting arrested and then released. Remember, there was a curfew and all the hundreds were arrested.
That's right.
And then they were released and not charged because they were emotionally upset. That was literally what the DA said. Now, that DA has been thrown out. Trump has called in the National Guard. So if you attack the National Guard or if you attack a federal building, it's a federal offense. I believe Trump lost the 2020 election because he didn't quash the George Floyd riots immediately.
It's a very good point. It's a very good point.
He allowed... I told someone that today, and they says, Trump was in charge during the George Floyd era. They thought it was a Democrat because the riots went on so long. They thought, Tim Walz let Minnesota burn. Gavin Newsom.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
cops were held back, and the cops were held
yeah.
back on was it Friday or Saturday night when the federal people were attacked, and Karen Bass, the mayor of LA, saying, "Oh, it was because they released tear gas that it was too uncomfortable for them to go in. Put on your big man boots, LAPD. Well, actually, LAPD they're pretty good cops. Uh, they would have went in but they were ordered not to go in."
Yes,
Because
yes.
they wanted to teach the federales a lesson. Well, federales
Mm.
have responded and saying, we're not your guinea pigs. We're not your lesson of the day. We're going to bring in the National Guard to protect us, to do our job. So, Trump,
We'll see how this develops. I mean, we're recording just after the weekend, just after all this stuff started. So we'll see by the time this comes out whether or not it's all over. But it's not good, and it needs to be stopped.
yes.
It's very scary. And closing off the 101, which they did earlier, like that's actually preventing people going to hospitals or
Yeah.
all kinds of serious things that could be happening
But
there by cutting off that artery that's bringing traffic from one side of the city to the other. So very serious stuff.
Gavin Newsom has arrived. Governor Gavin Newsom has arrived in town.
Dear, oh dear.
Do you
Yeah.
feel a lot safer, Anne?
Yeah. No, I don't actually. No, and I think and I've seen on X, it's very amusing on X how people are reacting to his arrival and his, what he's been saying, and they're basically, my favorite one was where somebody said basically, thanks a lot, go back and have it, stuff your face at the French Laundry, for all we care, So, yeah. And by the way, don't forget that those riots were condoned by, I'm trying to remember which of the medical associations of America condoned those riots, those previous riots, those George Floyd riots. And basically there was some kind of a health exception
That's right.
for, that suddenly COVID wasn't going to be spread for some reason in these, in these riots that happened.
We couldn't go to the beach.
Correct.
The beaches were banned. Gavin Newsom closed the bloody beaches, right? But
except for Phelan McAleer and Anne McElhinney did have an autonomous zone
yes.
on the beach at Venice, which we're very proud of.
Yeah.
And it was quite funny, by the way. There's pictures of us in our autonomous zone at Venice Beach, and the cops were like driving past us on the beach, and they were all waving and being very nice to us. But we have a wonderful interview now that you did earlier, Phelan, with Andrew Doyle. Tell us about that.
Well, Andrew Doyle, GB News, he interviewed us actually about our play Trans on Trial. He worked for GB News, which is kind of the equivalent of Fox News in the UK, but not really. It's the alternative media in the UK. He's now living in Arizona, but he's just written a book about the death of wokeness, which is a bold claim. And I interviewed him to see if it's true and what we can expect after the counter-revolution. So let's go over to that interview that I did earlier.
So today on the show, we have Andrew Doyle. He's a man of many talents, playwright, journalist, political satirist, a broadcaster, a comedian, and an author. I've been interviewed on his show actually once. He had a show on GB News, Free Speech Nation, GB News, which is a British independent TV station, where we have him on now to speak about his new book, which has the interesting title, The End of Woke, How the Culture War Went Too Far and What to Expect from the Counter-Revolution. A bold claim indeed. So he's here to give us some insight. So Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me. Of course, the title isn't a claim as such. It's more a kind of, let's envisage what would happen if woke was at an end. But also, it's an acknowledgement that I think, or I make the case that the culture war is moving into a new phase, and it won't be the same as what's gone before. So we do probably need a new name for it. That's the claim I'm making, really.
Oh, interesting. Yes. Okay. Well, before we look at where we're hoping to go or where we're going to go, let's look at where we were. And, I think, there's a couple of phrases that struck me from the book. One was the tragedy of wokeness, and you make the point, USAID, and you mentioned Andrew Sullivan, the journalist, said, how USAID jeopardized its credibility and its humanitarian work, which it does do some of that by pushing pet ideological projects of our enlightened elites. A satirist couldn't have written some of the projects that USAID were involved in.
Yeah, it's insane. I mean, there's stuff about, millions of dollars on Guatemalan LGBT pottery or whatever it might be. I mean, it sounds like someone's invented them. I mean, even Andrew Sullivan's a good example because he's very anti-Trump. He's against the Trump administration. He's very skeptical about Doge and all the rest of it. But even he has to acknowledge that a lot of this stuff is indefensible, and it absolutely is. And it just goes to show, I think, that any organization no matter what it is, whether it's a corporate organization or a governmental organization or a quango or whatever it might be, or a charity, if they are infected by this ideology, then its main function becomes to propagate the creed of that ideology, and the original function of the charity or the organization becomes secondary. USAID do landmine clearance. They do feeding of people fleeing war. Actually stuff that I think a lot of conservatives would say fair enough. But because they're also spending millions and millions of dollars on promoting transgender ideology in other countries and that kind of thing, exactly what Andrew Sullivan says, the pet ideological projects of the elites, it undermines the whole damn thing. And that's we've seen that again and again in all sorts of cases. Sometimes when an organization becomes captured, it completely forgets about its principal cause. I mean, if you take Stonewall, which used to be the foremost gay rights charity in the UK, since it pivoted to gender identity ideology in 2015, it's now actually promoting ideas that work against the interests of gay people in the name of trans ideology. So it's a very strange effect. I mean, it's been described as a virus, the woke virus. I know Elon Musk often calls it the woke mind virus. But actually, in my last book, in The New Puritans, it's a book I wrote in 2022, I quote some woke activists who describe their own ideology as a virus themselves. They say we have to think of it in terms of a virus. We will infect and replicate. So it's not actually pejorative, because it's just taking the terms that they use themselves.
Yeah, it's funny you should talk about a virus. I was just talking to someone at the weekend about the anti-Semitism in Ireland, and I was trying to describe what it is. And it used to be an elite thing, and now I think it's gone down beyond the elites. And I think it is a virus. It sounds trite almost sometimes to say a virus or alarmist, but it's an infection, and I don't mean that it seems to infect things and people.
It stops people thinking. I mean, you can end up having conversations with people where they will sincerely claim, yes, men can become women, or vice versa. Yes, it is a great idea to put children on drugs if they don't conform to old-fashioned stereotypes of sex. I mean, the idea that, tomboys have all but disappeared. The idea that a girl that likes football and likes climbing trees, that would be a girl who would be told now, you're probably a boy. And it's genuine. People who genuinely call themselves progressive can't see how regressive that is. That's a kind of virus. The unthinkingness of it. I think that's what frightens me the most about it, is that people just completely surrender their critical thinking capacity, and it crosses all sides of the political spectrum. This is the other thing that really. From my book, I make the case that this is never to do with left or right. Like this is something that transcends both. In the UK, the worst excesses of the woke movement were presided over by the Conservative Party, by those on the right. It's only because in America you've had this Trump movement, and Trump was elected quite explicitly on an anti-woke ticket, right? But you haven't had that in the UK. In a way, we need someone like that to come in and say, I'm the anti-woke candidate, to get a popular mandate for it.
I would argue slightly differently in the sense that the reason the anti-woke movement has been, and I would say it has been successful in the UK, especially among the trans issue, is because a lot of the people who opposed it came from the left.
Yeah, I agree.
In the US, it has split among the left-right dichotomy, whereas in the UK, a lot of old lefties are anti-woke because they've come from certain issues.
Well, you say it's split, but then if you take the issue of men and women's sports, 67% of Democrat voters oppose that. So I'm not so sure. I think what happens is when people investigate the truth of the claims being made by woke ideologues, whether they're on the left or the right, eventually they understand what they mean. I think the reason why you had such popular support for Black Lives Matter is because very quickly they removed from their website the pro-Marxist dismantling of the nuclear family, LGBTQIA plus stuff, and therefore were able to appeal. In other words, it's through misrepresentation and misdirection that the woke ideologues become entrenched. It is true that there's always more support for them on those who are on the left in America, but like the trans issue is a good one. Trump actually found a cause there that unifies the left and the right. I suppose what I mean is it's been imposed irrespective of your political view. I think you're right that in England and in the UK, it was difficult because the feminist pushback against gender ideology was so overwhelmingly from the left that now it's sort of exploded this idea that it's a simple left-right dichotomy. The Free Speech Union, of course, which was set up by Toby Young 5 years ago, and they've represented over 3,500 cases. When he set that up, it was roundly criticized and mocked for being this right-wing movement that was only going to defend right-wingers. Turns out it's mostly defended left-wingers because it's mostly been women who've been cancelled from their jobs. So, and that's again exploded that myth. But if you take Ireland, to give an example, I mean, I was in the Doyle last year for a free speech event.
The Irish Parliament.
The Irish Parliament, sorry, yes. They have in that building the Progress Pride flag now etched permanently onto a glass door, which everyone has to walk through, whichever party they come from, whether they agree with the connotations or not. In other words, it is something that it's almost, that's an emblem. That's saying you have to agree with this. You have to pay a fealty to this, no matter which side of the political aisle you're on. And similarly, in Belfast City Hall, just a couple of weeks ago, a new stained glass monstrosity, a window, which is all in the Progress Pride flag colours. Again, you know, it doesn't matter whether you're Sinn Féin, whether you're DUP. It doesn't matter what you are. It's there now, presiding over you as though you have to subscribe to it. And I just think that's only sustainable up until the point where people don't realise what it is they are supporting. I think a lot of the people who say they're pro-pride think they're supporting gay rights. And that's as far as their thinking takes them. They don't realise they're supporting an ideology that is against gay rights. They've no idea.
Explain that for the people who are not as well read into woke.
Well, obviously, I go into it at length in my book, and it is complicated. The reason why, the gay rights movement was secured and predicated on the notion that in any given population there is a minority of individuals who, for whatever reason, are attracted to their own sex, be that to do with biological factors or socialization, whatever it might be, doesn't matter. That's a fact of history that is verifiable. The gender identity ideology comes along and says that biological sex does not really exist. Stonewall redefined the word homosexual on its website to mean attracted to the same gender. What it means is you should be attracted to some kind of spirit, some kind of essence within. In other words, you should extend your dating pool to include members of the opposite sex who identify into your sex class. This is why, at the moment, in Australia, it is illegal for lesbians to have a lesbian gathering without men, because a man who identifies as a lesbian has to be allowed to attend, because otherwise you are discriminating against that individual. Any lesbian dating app, just a dating app, now has a significant proportion, some women tell me as many as 25% of men with beards, with male genitalia, saying we're lesbians and shaming women who don't find them attractive or who have ruled them out. Okay, but they're not being discriminatory. They're being gay. If you're a woman who doesn't find men attractive, that's not discrimination. That's sexual orientation. Similarly, you have Stonewall, as I've said, and groups like that who are effectively saying, I mean, the head of Stonewall, Nancy Kelly, former head of Stonewall, compared lesbians who weren't attracted to men who identified as women to sexual racists. So you now have a gay rights charity shaming women for being gay. And that is something that, and of course, ultimately, we know from the Tavistock Clinic, which is the NHS paediatric gender clinic in London, we know from the work of Hannah Barnes that between 80 and 90% of all adolescents referred to that clinic were same-sex attracted, right? What that means is...
We often were told in America we were praying away the gay, but they were transing away the gay.
They were medicalizing the gay. The statistically, we know this. The overwhelming majority of children who are referred to paediatric gender clinics are those who are gender non-conforming in one way or another, maybe effeminate boys or masculine girls. We also know from repeated studies that gender non-conformity in youth equates almost always to homosexuality in later life. Not always. You should never assume anything about a child's sexual orientation, but the vast majority of cases, it's just going to be someone who grows up gay. So you effectively have paediatric gender clinics, the NHS, practicing gay conversion therapy through medical intervention, which is what...
medical intervention of children. So what you're saying is people who wave at the Pride Parade don't know what they're waving at.
They're supporting gay conversion therapy, state-sanctioned gay conversion therapy, which is what they do in Iran. In Iran, the government will murder gay people because they consider it abomination. or they will pay for you to have a sex change operation, to heterosexualize, to fix you, right? That's what the NHS were doing. That's what various American pediatric clinics are doing. I mean, in America, it's worse. I think the Manhattan Institute study found that up to 6,000 girls under 18 had double mastectomies. And I think it was something like 50 were under 12 and a half years old. Well, that's just child abuse, frankly.
It's worse. But, you talk about we're in the death rattle of woke. And something that I didn't know, you say that politicians such as AOC and Pete Buttigieg have quietly removed their pronouns from their social media profiles. Is that correct? I mean, that's amazing. So what do you think? So you think that signifies the death rattle of woke? And why do you think they did that? Did they see this coming, or are they looking for higher office? What was their? Have they been asked about that?
They have. AOC has tried to sort of wriggle out of it by saying, I can't remember what, she came up with some elaborate excuse as to why it was removed. And, when Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, removed his, he got such a backlash from trans activists. He then capitulated and put it back in. And he even came out with an excuse saying, oh, he said something like it was a typo, or it was an administration error. But of course,
yes,
to go into someone's bio, into the account, and remove words, that's not an administration error. That's a thing that's been decided upon. So yeah, it's things like that actually that make me think things are really changing. They know which way the wind is blowing. I think particularly in America, when you've seen the likes of Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg stripping away DEI policies, there's a heightened awareness now because of the Caste Review, because of the Supreme Court in the UK's ruling that you can't change sex by waving a certificate about. All of this stuff, these are seismic changes.
Yes.
And I think it's impossible, if you're a politician, not to see where this is ultimately heading. And where it is ultimately heading is truth. Activists will continue to bleat that it is possible to change sex. They will continue to claim systemic racism, even when evidence says there's no evidence whatsoever of racism. They will continue to chase these dragons of their mind. But ultimately, the truth will out when it comes to democracy, because a democracy is dealing with the majority of the population. And as I've said, the majority of the population, left or right, don't want men in women's spaces, right? So ultimately and I think the majority of the population are fed up with being called racist and fed up with people claiming that everything is white supremacist. You can see the huge swing to Trump in the last election from ethnic minority voters, right? It's not just white people. Yeah. Everyone's sick of it. So I do think these are the death rattles. But as I'm at pains to point out in the book, it's the beginning of a process, and it could be years, it could be decades, it could be that wokeness reemerges in another guise, because I think it's very adept at shape shifting. But I don't think we can ever go back to what it was at its height. And we've seen, the studies have shown the decline is clear. The Economist did a study. The peak of it was around 2021, just after the Black Lives Matter riots and protests. And it's been declined. Support for woke initiatives have been declining ever since, and will continue to do so.
Yeah. One of the biggest culture warriors for woke was someone called Titania McGrath.
Yeah, she was a nasty one, right?
She was a nasty one. So this was for those who don't know, it was a person on Twitter who was really just so pure and so wonderful and so woke. My favorite line from her: if you find yourself laughing at comedy, it probably isn't sufficiently progressive. That was you in a satirical. Well, that was you in a satirical account.
Yeah.
Why did you tell me about that experience of setting up a satirical woke person?
Well, I mean, it was just that as a comedian, I've always mocked whoever I perceived to be in power. And I saw that this was a movement that was incredibly powerful, so powerful that very few people were mocking it. Very few professional comedians would go near it. And that, to me, it means, well, I better have a pop at it, because that's, whatever you're not meant to mock, that is surely what we're meant to mock as comedians, because that's where the power lies. And, this was a movement that was basically legitimizing bullying and was, attacking people for their points of view, shaming people for standing up for free speech and basically equal values. And, and I was sick of it. And so I thought, because the activists, their playground is Twitter, I would invent a character through Twitter and I could embody what it is that they say, which I thought satirically was the more satisfying way to mock it. And what I would do is try to replicate the kinds of logic that they go through, but maybe take it up a notch, maybe push it slightly too far so that it is clearly satirical. But then the trouble was, the most extreme things I would come up with came true, and you would find that months or years later, you'd have major news outlets repeating what Titania had suggested for real. As
news.
I actually compiled a big long list of the times where the tweets I've written as Titania as a joke have come true, and there's a lot of them, and it's very troubling. I mean, recently, and let me give you an example. So, after the assassination attempt against Donald Trump, she tweeted out that the assassination attempt against Donald Trump proves irrefutably that he is guilty of inciting violence. Now, obviously, that's a preposterous claim, and yet a judge in the UK has just ruled that a man who burnt his own copy of the Quran in a peaceful protest, who was then attacked and stabbed by a passerby and kicked by another passerby, that the violence against him is proof that he was stirring up disorderly behavior. So this was just last week. The judge in this case has taken Titania's logic and used it to prosecute someone for disposing of their own property in a peaceful protest. That's where we're at.
Yeah. So if you're the victim of violence, then you are obviously provoking that violence. It's guilty of an offence.
It's the old-fashioned, your skirt was probably too short.
Yeah.
Basically, but it's coming from a judge in a UK court who has now effectively introduced de facto blasphemy laws against Islam into our system.
So, I mean, the book is amazing. I mean, you bring up so many things that were true that people have maybe forgotten. I mean, and this is so true. Most of the excesses in the UK were under a Conservative government. Theresa May, the Conservative Prime Minister, she said she was proud to be woke.
Yes.
Where are we now, and what's the future? What do you see the future, and how can we help deliver that future? How can we help?
Well,
what can we do?
The big thing that's changed, I think, is that those in political power have realised that wokeness loses votes, and that Wes Streeting, for example, who is the Health Secretary, Labour, left-wing Health Secretary, he has now come all out against gender identity ideology. And he has, in fact, just a couple of days ago, has intervened when it comes to the NHS and said you have to provide female spaces, changing spaces for your female nursing staff. He has done that.
Just stop there for a moment, because we have a lot of American listeners. So just to be clear, up until 4 days ago or 3 days ago, nurses were forced to change into their nurses' uniforms with men in the same room. And a number of nurses who objected were then disciplined and suspended for being intolerant bigots.
Exactly. There have been a number of running court cases in the UK regarding this. There's a group of nurses from a hospital in Darlington who took a case against their employer because they were being... obviously, nurses, of all people, have to get changed at work for all sorts of reasons, And there's a couple of these women, some of these women had been victims of sexual assault in the past. They don't want a man in the room. Now, apparently, one of the men who identify as women who was in that room was staring at the women as they were getting undressed. One of them even said, I think this man said, "Are you getting undressed yet?" Now, there's that going on. There's a woman called Sandy Peggy, who's a nurse at a Scottish hospital, who, again, similar thing. In fact, in her case, she was menstruating and she needed to change. And there was a man in the room and she'd asked him to leave. And he'd put in a complaint and she was called the bigot. The employers in all these cases have said, you need to stop being bigoted, because they didn't want a man in their changing area. So this has been going through the courts. Concurrently, we've had the Supreme Court ruling, which has now ruled that actually the NHS is obliged to provide single-sex spaces. Now that that's happened, all of these cases are only going to go one way. Yeah. And actually, it's got to the point where the Health Secretary has intervened and said enough is enough. And I don't think people understand quite, and maybe your American listeners don't understand how bad it got in the UK.
Yeah.
It has been official NHS policy. It's a thing called Annex B. It's a policy in the NHS that if a member of staff is asked whether individuals are of one sex or another, they must answer according to gender identity ideology, not according to sex. So, for instance, when a woman was sexually assaulted on a ward, a women's ward in a London hospital, and the police turned up, the staff member said to them that could not have happened because there were no men on that ward, knowing that there was a man who identified as a woman, but the staff were lying to the police, and that was official NHS policy to obstruct an investigation into rape. That's how serious this has got. So it's now shifted wildly. And that's why I make this point that when you have left-wing politicians like Wes Streeting, who, let's face it, has one eye on being Prime Minister one day and has ambitions to be Prime Minister one day, I have absolutely no doubt of that. He obviously knows that this is the way it's going. And similarly in America, I think you're going to get the same thing. Like, I don't know. A lot of people are talking about AOC maybe rising. But I'm very doubtful, because I think we've seen again and again, Kamala Harris, it didn't work, did it? The advertisement that most shifted support towards Trump was the slogan, Kamala Harris is for they, them, President Trump is for you. And that think tank, Future Forward, which is a Democratic think tank, no fan of Trump, actually analysed that and said it actuated a 2.7 shift towards Trump among everyone who watched that. So we now know, and politicians are not stupid, they know that in order to secure power, they have to be popular. Excuse me. So they're not going to go for the woke initiatives are not vote winners and never have.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that the Democrats have got the
Maybe
message
not.
here, got the memo. I mean, I listen for my sins to a lot of left wing podcasts, so the Pod Save America bros and those kind of people. And for a while, they were talking. We need a Joe Rogan of the right, of the left. We need to talk to people, in the way Joe Rogan. We need to go on the Joe Rogan shows. We need to go on these shows, and that's wonderful, because they still believe it's the medium, not the message.
Well, for one thing, they did have a Joe Rogan of the left. He was called Joe Rogan. And, he was driven away because of their absolute lunacy. And again, I think, well, in a way, it's good that they're not getting it.
No, they're not getting it.
They're not going to get in. They're not going to get in.
Even the Pod Save America guys, they laugh now at we need a Joe Rogan of the right, because they say that's simplistic. But they still talk about trans rights. They still, as one of their main planks, as the thing that makes you a Democrat, the thing that makes you a good person. So they're not getting it, and it's funny. They're smart people, but they're not understanding, and it's not. And I'd rather they got it because it's the right thing to do, rather than they got it because they want to win power. But they haven't got it either way.
No. So they're just condemning themselves to electoral oblivion, and that's up to them. I don't think it's possible now. Now that everyone knows what they know, now that there's been all that, now that you've seen these images of men, hulking men towering over women in sports events on the winners' podium. Yes. We've seen all that now. You can't go back, and until they figure that out, they're not going to be voted in. I really do believe that. I think it would be very unlikely that the likes of AOC would actually win a general election. I think it unlikely.
Okay. If you want someone to take something from your book, like why did you write the book? I suppose that's one way of asking it. What message do you want to come from the book?
Well, because I think the entire culture war has been fundamentally misunderstood by a lot of people on all sides of the debate. And I think ultimately my book is a defense of liberal values. And of course, in America, that's complicated, because in America, people think liberal means left wing, and it doesn't. And, so I'm talking about old fashioned liberal values: freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of belief, freedom of association, meritocracy, democracy, the idea of individual autonomy and freedom, but also social responsibility and equality before the rule of law. All of those things that transcend left and right. And I think the culture war has been misunderstood as being about left versus right, whereas what it should be is liberty versus authoritarianism. And that's what it is. And the book is really a warning. I'm saying, look, throughout human history, this is the struggle. This is the perennial struggle. And there are pockets of history where authoritarianism wins out. And then you get fascist regimes, communist regimes. It can come from the left or the right or anywhere in between. Doesn't matter. That seems to me to be the default in human nature. And so therefore, to create a civilization, you need to preserve and fight for liberal values, which is the harder thing to do. And it's
Yes.
much harder. I mean, people always say, oh, these wishy-washy liberals and everything, but I think they're misusing the term.
Yes.
And I think they don't understand that actually defending those values that I've just outlined is the hardest thing, because it doesn't have the sexiness of, you know.
Oh, it's so hard. Defending free speech is so hard.
Yeah.
Because it's only free speech if it's the people you really despise.
You have to defend those people. Yeah, it's and when you do,
you have to defend those vile kneecap people.
Yeah.
I mean, we've talked about it on the show before about Kneecap, the Irish rap band. These are pro-Hamas, pro-Hezbollah guys who'd run a mile if they ever met a real terrorist in their life, by the way. They're just cosplaying. But anyway, they're terrible people. But they've been charged under the Terrorism Act in Britain for on stage as part of a performance allegedly shouting up Hezbollah. I mean, being in favor of free speech means you're allowed to shout Hezbollah on the street, but the idea that you're not allowed to shout it on stage as part of a performance, I mean, that means every actor on the planet can never be a terrorist now, because you could be prosecuted for saying something as part of a performance.
Well, there's a few points about that. I mean, in the UK, it is illegal to support prescribed terrorist organizations. Now, okay, well, Hezbollah is a prescribed terrorist group. So is Hamas. So is the IRA. But I mean, I've known many people who have been open in their support of the IRA.
Yes, I may have been to school with a lot of them.
Yeah, sure, right.
Yes.
So I would say, I mean, I disagree with that law. I think if you are supporting a terrorist organization materially, as in raising funds, participating, then of course that should be illegal. Yes. Standing on a street corner and say, I support the IRA or whatever, I think that, that's up to you. I think I would rather people who are supporting terrorist groups out themselves. I would rather know who they are, and that's that, because then we can challenge them. We can have that argument and we can ridicule them.
No, it's awful. I mean, because there are people supporting terrorist groups all the time, and it's just when publicity happened to fall on Kneecap that they are now charged, and it's. I mean, there's 2 points. It's inconsistent, but it's just wrong, even if it was consistent.
Your point is very, very important about the cosplaying. The Kneecap, and look, I'm not a fan of that sort of music, so I can't really judge the music. But what I would say is that their entire brand is this faux nostalgic throwback to the troubles that they didn't live through.
Yes.
The one of them wears a balaclava in the color of the Irish flag. The kids, the 2 younger guys, they've never experienced any of it. And the name Kneecap is obviously a reference to the paramilitary shooting of the knee, punishment beating. Now they've no direct connection with the troubles.
Yes.
To the extent that they can get Jerry Adams to have a cameo in their film, even though a lot of people I know hold him responsible for the deaths of people they knew, and so it's very easy for them to romanticize and see this as just something they can turn into an accessory for a pop band. Yeah. Part of that cosplaying, of course, is support for the Middle East. I've seen in the Bogside in Derry numerous times over many years. First time I saw it was when I was in early 20s. We're going back a long time. Flags, Middle Eastern flags, Gazan flags, Palestinian flag, whatever it might be, alongside the Irish flag and the painted curbstones. There's always been this romanticized, oversimplified, reductive view amongst Irish republicanism that they have some kind of connection with what's going on in the Middle East, even though the conflicts could not be more dissimilar. And you would even see, I remember walking up from the Bogside to a Protestant enclave called the Fountain, on the city side, and seeing all the Israeli flags suddenly, and it was tit for tat. So you had the loyalist paramilitaries were putting those up as a direct response to the Republicans in the Bogside putting up the Palestinian flag. So this is cosplay. Now, if your entire act is a cosplay faux IRA, I mean, they were singing "Ooh Ah Hezbollah," a variation of "Ooh Ah Up the IRA,"
and
so. But it's part of the how can I put it? It's part of the theatrical persona.
It's a theatrical. No, it's a piece of theater, right?
Right,
And I mean,
right.
and they probably wouldn't appreciate us saying, but it obviously is. Even if they think about it themselves,
course
they're
it is,
you know, it's their brand. It's part of a musical theater, right? That's what it is, and that means I can't write a verbatim play now
Right.
and
Well,
put it on in
no,
Britain.
it's so important because we've always accepted in pop music performances not to take things at face value, because it is. I mean, there are like Marilyn Manson. I know there are a lot of American Christian fundamentalists who say Marilyn Manson is invoking the devil or something, but no, he's not. He's doing this ridiculous, absurdist performance. If you actually hear him talk off stage, he's really gentle and very moderate, and it's
quite a middle class. You can imagine him picking up the paper and having a cup of coffee.
It's very funny. It's like it's like the rapper Drake, who was a child TV star, hardly ghetto, sort of trying to embody ghetto ideas for his music, because it's not real. It's show business. It's theatre. You may as well get upset about a production of Macbeth because of the infanticide. You may as well have say we don't support infanticide. Why are you showing Macbeth? When he kills the kids in that or Richard III or whatever it might be. Like it is a real problem for the arts. And I see this coming from both sides. Actually, I see a lot of sort of woke activists saying we need to censor the arts so that it sends the correct message. But I also see figures on the right saying we disapprove of that in the arts, so we need to censor it as well. You need to be able to understand that the arts is not real. That's why it's called art. It's artifice. It's really important.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming on the show. You're now coming to America, or are you in America?
At the moment, I'm not in America, but I will be next week. This time next week, I will be in Arizona, and I will be working on a sitcom, actually, with Graham Linehan, who wrote Father Ted. And I'm working with Rob Schneider, who I'm sure you know. And we are working on a number of projects, hopefully television and film. And we'll see what we can get off the ground. It's very exciting. And I think it's a good time to be doing it, like to go back to producing stuff that isn't, it's funny and isn't ideologically driven,
Yeah. You've spent some time in Arizona already, have you?
Yeah, I've been out there, and I love it there. I think it's a bit of a culture shock, because obviously,
it must be an enormous culture shock.
Well, it's basically the Wild West, isn't it? It's like it's the desert. I've been to a rodeo, for God's sake. I've been to a Tombstone where the OK Corral shooting was, and it's just very funny for someone like me who sunburns easily, and I've got very pallid skin, and to be in a place where it's 50 degrees in the summer is just something. And that in English terms is quite. What's 50 degrees Celsius in American Fahrenheit? What would that be? It's a lot anyway.
It's 120 or something like that.
It's baking. But I love the weather there. I love the people there. Everyone there is so nice in a way that I'm afraid you don't really get in London now. I mean, I hate to say that, but in London there's a constant threat of menace pretty much everywhere in public, and that we used to have a high trust society that's been obliterated. And I think in Arizona, certainly in Scottsdale where I am, the high trust element is still very much present, Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for coming on the show. The book is The End of Woke: How the Culture War Went Too Far and What to Expect from the Counter-Revolution. You can buy it in all good bookshops and online, I suppose. So thanks, Andrew. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Bye.
So that was a marvelous interview. And in the show notes, we'll have a link to where you can buy the book. We highly recommend it.
Yes, I hope.
Really, definitely.
I hope he's right. I hope he's right. He seems quite confident. And
he's a really nice writer, by the way.
Yes. And I said there, and I don't see a way forward for the Democrats. I mean, half the Democrats think we need a new Joe Rogan. And I'm going, please go on Joe Rogan and talk about trans sports and talk about wokeness.
Totally.
Please do, because
totally. Yeah. Because, and by the way, he's very open to having people on. So 100%, that's where they should go.
It's great as long as they
argue it out.
As long as they keep thinking it's the medium and not the message. That's the problem. keep giving us your message, because it helps everyone decide what's happening. So what else is on the show, Anne?
So, so basically, it's the holy month of Pride, and we always obviously celebrate it here. Last year, Easter 2024 was, Biden commemorated with, the Trans Day of Visibility. Things are a bit different. There's a bit of a different sheriff in town right now.
Yes.
And Trump's cabinet is celebrating the Pride month of 2025 by stripping the USS Harvey Milk of its name.
Yes.
And, it's very interesting because Harvey Milk, obviously, is beloved by the LGBTQ alphabet soup.
We should remind people.
But
we should remind people that he was the San Francisco supervisor, an elected politician, perhaps the first gay elected politician in the United States, who was assassinated, and they try and imply he was assassinated in some kind of anti-gay thing. It wasn't. I think it was a personal thing or a work thing or a crazy thing. But so the ship was called the USS Harvey Milk. Not really sure what that has to do with the Navy, but we have discovered there's a kind of a darker side to Harvey Milk. People may remember Jim Jones, the Guyana massacre.
Huge story. It's a huge story. I mean, I obsessed about it at the time. I mean, it's a long time ago, 1978.
I'll tell you how
I was a teenager.
I'll tell you how old.
And I was.
Yeah, I'll tell you how long ago it is. Our researcher.
1978.
Our researcher who was looking at it, I said, check that out. She goes, oh, this is where drinking the Kool-Aid comes from.
Oh, yeah. That's how young she is.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. Drinking the Kool-Aid. I mean, and people laugh about the drinking the Kool-Aid, and that phrase is used. But when you think about what it actually refers to, it's so sad. This guy, this Jim Jones, who was this charismatic cult leader who, brought all these people down to Guyana, and, and it all ended up with him, brainwashing them into doing a mass suicide.
900 people.
900 people died, including a lot of children, by the way. It's really awful. And I remember it had such an effect on me. I just remembered so clearly the Time magazine front page had this aerial photograph because they flew in afterwards because there was a whole thing where the congressman went out there and all of that. And they flew in and they saw the bodies from the air. They could see the bodies all spread out all over the place. It's an extraordinary story, really, really horrible story. 200 children, and the drink, this Kool-Aid, was basically, it was a Kool-Aid drink, which is a soda, but which was laced with cyanide.
Yeah, so
absolutely horrific. There's a picture. We're putting a picture up there on the screen.
People may be wondering, what is the connection between Harvey Milk and Jim Jones? So Harvey Milk wrote a letter, a passionate letter to the president of the United States, Jimmy Carter, urging him to get involved for Jim Jones and his wife. So Jim Jones had a baby with another member of the cult, because don't forget, this was a progressive cult, good progressive values like murdering children. So Harvey Milk wrote a letter basically urging Carter to get involved in this custody battle and give the children over to Jim Jones and his wife. And, I'm just going to quote you from the letter. And elsewhere, as a man of the highest character who has undertaken constructive remedies for social problems, which have been amazing in their scope and effectiveness. Our own board of supervisors have presented Reverend Jones with a certificate of honor, unanimously passed by all members, praising the church for its many projects which have been so beneficial to all citizens in the Bay Area. The parties attempting to damage Reverend Jones's reputation and seriously disrupt the life of his son have already been discredited. So he just goes on. And if you don't come out on his behalf, it could be great embarrassment to our State Department, Mr. President. So that's who Harvey.
And I think, by the way, I'm just remembering, Phelim, I think, and you can correct me, but I believe Jimmy Carter's wife, I think, was like a special friend.
That's right.
of
that's right.
Yeah, of Jim Jones. I think there was a whole thing, and yes. I think he there was a whole special kind of relationship there.
That's right.
It's very scary, very, very scary story. Really, really horrible. So anyway, Harvey Milk's name has been taken off the USS Harvey Milk, and it's we don't think that that's a massive tragedy of any kind. Actually, given what he did to help. Jim Jones, who then went on to kill 900 people.
Men, women and children.
Just men, women and children. But it's not the only thing that's happening for the Holy Month of Pride. There's some very good news, by the way. There's some very good news about the Holy Month of Pride, which I think is, and it would only happen, it's only happening because Trump won the presidency. And basically Target, the popular store for everyone, by the way.
Yes.
Target has of late, up until very recently, had, really devoted an enormous amount amount of resources and time and energy to celebrating the holy month
Yes.
of Pride by having huge sections of the store all designed with the, you know, the rainbow flag and all of this, and having like really gross and disgusting products for sale, like swimming suits with special tucky-in places.
Tuck, and let's call it what it is: tuck-friendly bathing suits, so that men who want to wear women's bathing suits can tuck certain parts of their anatomy in, so they can look more like a woman.
Anyway, the really good news this particular Pride month is that that's all stopped.
Yes, if you
for some reason, it's suddenly stopped now.
If you open the Target website now, you get patriotic colors, you get American flags, you get this, that, and the other. You have to hunt down the Pride memorabilia or whatever you want to call it. So progress of a sort, I think, on McElhinney.
Yes. I mean, the other story we wanted to very briefly touch on was this extraordinary story from the UK where Dawn French, who most Americans have not heard of, by the way, but Dawn French would be like this beloved, like absolutely beloved comedian
Who would she
from
be?
the UK.
Who would she be the equivalent to in America? I mean, she's kind of a national treasure. Is not kind of the...
Yes. No, she's totally, that's exactly right. She's exactly that. She was in a show in Britain called French and Saunders, which ran forever.
And the Vicar,
forever.
And the Vicar of Dibley and all, which we dealt with.
Which ran forever as well, you know, and she's been in theatre, she's been in movies. Like, she was in a bunch of movies.
You know who she is? Actually, if Patricia Heaton was a comedian, right? Because Patricia Heaton's been on... She's basically been on people's TV for 30 years on 2 different very popular shows, right? But imagine if Patricia was also a comedian, all too popular, everyone would know. Everyone knows her.
Everyone would know the name. So here's what's happened. I mean, the thing about her as well, and I think this is really worth, because we're going to watch. She posted a few days ago. She posted a video. Attacking the Israelis, attacking Jews, basically. And we let the video speak for itself. And what you need to remember when you watch this, it's only 30 seconds long. What you need to remember is this woman is a professional comedian. Like, I mean, a professional comedian.
Yes.
She has been at this for almost 50 years, I think.
Totally.
And so, and if you think about it, she has, you know, I just thought this the other day. I was watching something with Ricky Gervais in it, and I remember thinking, like, the reason Ricky Gervais is so good, he makes it look really easy, but my God, you have to work to make it look that easy. So she has worked on this stuff, and she doesn't produce... My point is, this particular 30 seconds was thought through meticulously. It's not a casual thing that anybody did. Let's just watch this and then comment on it.
Complicated. No, but nuanced. But, you know, bottom line is no. Yeah, but, you know, they did a bad thing to us. I mean, yeah, but no. But we want that land, and we don't know, got the history, and we got, you know, no. Those people, not even people, are they really? No.
Yeah, I think the point you're making, Anne, it's not like somebody had too much drinks on a Saturday night and did that.
Yeah.
This is someone, and it's not someone who doesn't know the power of comedy. It's not someone who doesn't know the power of social media. She knows all of this, and she did it in full sobriety. Now, obviously, I think what she didn't
anticipate, however, was, you know, because she has been a TV star, like a massive TV star, back particularly in the time when there was only a number of TV channels, very, you know, kind of limited enough. So the world of content has totally changed since then. And so she put this out on X, which is the Wild West of free speech, by the way. Like, everyone is allowed to be there now. And what transpired since she posted that in the 2 days before the next installment in the Dawn French, scenario is she got the most massive pile-on, an incredible pile-on. And it's worth looking at, by the way. And some of the stuff is so tough to read. People writing about relatives and friends who were kidnapped, who were murdered on October 7th, and saying, you're making fun of my father, of my grandfather who survived, by the way, the Holocaust, survived Auschwitz, only for you to mock the rape of young people and the burning of babies alive. Like, you know, so anyway, interestingly enough, it's funny how she suddenly has decided that she made a huge mistake. And I think what might be interesting, Phelim, is for people to realise that one of her biggest financial, nice money trains, one of the nice money trains she has in her life is Marks and Spencer's, which is the huge, British department store that is like beloved in Britain. And Dawn French has been used for years by that company as, for advertising. And so she'd have a nice, really nice income out of that.
Millions.
And millions. And what she may have just forgotten is the fact that Marks and Spencer's was started by 2 Jewish men, I think it was, and a Christian man. And I think people who may be related to them, may have been in touch with her, as well as all the other people who piled on. And then she, and I won't read the whole thing. It's actually, she doesn't deserve it, actually, by the way. She writes this huge apology, and my intention was, I never intended to mock anybody. And my heart broke. She said, my heart broke for the many innocent people and their families that were killed, tortured, raped and kidnapped. So she basically says, my intention was to mock and point the finger of shame at the behaviour of cruel leaders on all sides. But she did the whole both-sidism, she did the whole both sides thing.
Yeah.
There were no both sides in the video. And as I said, I think the most important thing about the video, the most important thing for people to remember is this is a professional who everything she does, when she produces content, it's meticulously edited, meticulously worked through and rehearsed in advance. She didn't do this casually. As Phelim said, she didn't have a couple of glasses of wine and decide to do this. But it's interesting how she, and by the way, our dear friend, by the way, Lawrence Fox, decided to mock her. And maybe we'll play that video of Lawrence mocking her. Let's watch that.
Complicated. They did a bad thing. Yeah, they did. 1,200 murderous barbarians crossed the border into Israel to massacre, murder, behead, burn alive totally innocent civilians, and then drag hostages and the remains of some of those that they killed back into Gaza, where the streets were filled with people who celebrated, spat, beat and cheered the massacre that had just taken place. I want their land. Yes, probably to avoid people coming into your land and murdering and massacring your own people. It's nuanced. Yes, it is quite nuanced, isn't it? Despite the fact that Hamas tend to keep their military infrastructure stored and arranged right in the middle of civilian populations to maximise the propaganda value of anybody dying, Israel has managed to keep the deaths, the civilian ratios to military ratios, deaths to the lowest in recorded military history. So, are you talking Dawn? Yes. Do I for a single second believe that you apologise for it? No. You thought you were in a rehearsal room with a bunch of actors where this sort of thing carries on all the time and you're all like Free Palestine, you hate the Tories, but you found out that the real world doesn't agree with you. Does it?
Can I just say, Lawrence got cancelled for saying something on Question Time, which is a sober TV program about immigration,
Correct.
about the myth of systemic racism, complaining that he was white, there's nothing he can do about it. If white people are systemically racist, that is a racist, saying that's a racist, that is racist about him. He got cancelled.
He lost his whole career
over that.
He lost his whole career for that.
And she's not going to lose her career. She's not going to.
Well, we'll see.
No, she's not.
You're probably right. You're probably right.
It's different rules for them. Look, this is a very long podcast now, Anne McElhinney.
Yes. No, we're coming to the end of it. Basically, a lot of people, I want to look at the comments for a moment. People have been, we love the comments. We read all the comments. Thank you so much. Everyone loved Wesley Smith, as we love Wesley Smith. And we were so glad that he could come on. And Jerry Maricotte, who's one of our big supporters, has been writing. And he said, I learned a lot about physician-assisted suicide when I volunteered a few months ago to talk to my state senators and reps about it here in Maryland, about the whole euthanasia thing. Yeah. And basically the point that Jerry makes is that this cocktail that they give people for euthanasia, if it's not used, is out there in the world, and it's kind of it's a thing that's, again, it's a kind of an unreported story that out there in the world is this extremely lethal cocktail, which could end up in the wrong hands. And that, there's, again, very little regulation in all of this. Somebody else asked, by the way, about Wesley's article in Newsweek, and you can literally find it by Googling Wesley Smith Newsweek. But again, I'll put the link up in the show notes again, because I think people really do want to know about it. And then we asked people about, like, what is Phelim's relationship with his cousin? And the answer is, Phelim?
Oh, you tell me.
Here we have them. Well, everyone wrote. So Katie Mack wrote, and she said, your father's first cousin is your first cousin once removed.
Okay.
Your father's first cousin's child would be your second cousin.
Okay.
He's a priest. He doesn't have a child.
That's correct.
So basically everyone said first cousin once removed. And then somebody wrote as well that no one's talking about the food on the train. Yeah, the train, really disgusting food. And we were not impressed with the Acella at all. But we are a 501c3. If you like what we do and you want to support our work, please do. You can go to unreportedstoriesociety.com, unreportedstoriesociety.com. Please do go. Please do donate. We are very dependent on your donations.
Okay. That's all for this week. Thank you very much. And talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.